Good evening and welcome to Front Page, only on the AIM network, India's definitive media organization and voice on everything AI and technology. This week, several separate developments pointed in the same direction. The shift from promise to execution is underway. And here are the headlines. Microsoft's GitHub Copilot SDK formalizes the shift to agentic orchestration, validating Ryan Dahl's warning that the human coding era is over and signaling the death of the traditional headcount advantage. Defying IMF's second-tier label, Vaishnaw projects $100 billion in investments at February's India AI Impact Summit, positioning the nation as the world's undisputed AI execution engine. While Minister Vaishnaw predicts inevitable growth, IMF's Gita Gopinath issues a stark reality check. India's top three dream faces a bigger economic threat from pollution rather than global trade wars. And finally, Davos got the charm. Bengaluru gets the muscle. Karnataka clears a 20 crore rupees applied AI center, pivoting from global branding to deep tech execution as big tech doubles down on the city. Welcome to Front Page. What matters is not who writes the code, but who controls the system that runs it, end quote. This was said by Martin Fowler, software engineer and author. And this quote is relevant in setting the tone for our first story on Front Page this evening, as there is an unease moving through engineering teams right now, particularly inside large enterprises. Teams are getting smaller, not because demand has weakened, but because the arithmetic has changed. In yesterday's tech world, shipping a production-grade application meant assembling a team, and 20 engineers per team did not raise any eyebrows. But today, the same outcome is increasingly driven by one person, coordinating a system of agents, and Microsoft has formalized that very shift. But of course, before we explore further, I hope you have noticed that by now that we only craft stories that actually make a difference and an impact. If you think this video delivers on that standard, which I hope it does, please hit the hype button. Help us get this across to the people who need to hear it. And now, back to the story. Microsoft calls it the GitHub Copilot SDK. It exposes the same agent runtime that powers Copilot, now available as a reusable component inside applications. Building agentic workflows has so far been very complex. Developers have had to maintain context across multiple steps, orchestrate tools, route tasks between models, integrate MCP servers, manage permissions, safeties, and retries. In many cases, teams ended up building infrastructure before writing product logic. The GitHub Copilot SDK removes much of that overhead. It allows developers to embed a production-tested agent runtime directly into their applications. The system can plan tasks, switch models, execute commands, and it can now be controlled programmatically. The objective is not to remove developers, no, but conversely, to reduce dependence on large teams. The application no longer operates as a static author. It functions as a supervisor. In its technical preview, the SDK includes a multimodal execution loop, built-in planning, MCP server integration, GitHub authentication, streaming responses. It supports Node.js, Python, Go, and .NET. Models can, of course, now change roles mid-workflow. One plans another executes, another reviews. And this is handled automatically. Individual agents remain unreliable. Engineered execution offers predictability. Microsoft's focus is runtime engineering, guardrails, metrics, visibility, determinism. These are the attributes that play a very crucial role in production environments. A comparable shift took place in data centers over the past decade. Before managed cloud services, companies hired large teams, if you remember, to maintain servers, manage failures, and scale capacity manually. As cloud platforms matured, those teams shrank. The work didn't disappear, it just moved up the stack. Software development is right now undergoing a very similar transition, making this moment particularly favorable for the solo builder. Applications designed around agentic cores are beginning to outperform those without them. Yes, one person can now assemble internal tools and manage complex workflows without assembling large teams. Indian IT companies are already responding. Yes, employees are increasingly expected to operate as independent delivery units, coordinating multiple agents rather than contributing to large teams. The commercial outcome is evident. More projects, more throughput, higher margins. The employment outcome, though, is still, well, a little unsettled. That part remains contested. Indian IT firms have historically been effective at reframing transitions. The data, however, will surface in the next financial cycle. Journalists will begin asking different questions, I assure you. Analysts will start revising assumptions. Of course, front page will forever be front and center and will be watching. And of course, now here is the front page take. At Davos, Anthropic chief executive Dario Amodei suggested AI could replace most coding tasks within 6 to 12 months. Google DeepMind's Demis Hassabis offered a longer timeline of about 3 to 5 years. Bill Gates has also warned of accelerating disruption. But the most profound statement came from Ryan Dahl, the creator of Node.js. He said this: "The era of humans writing code is ending," end quote. When the person who helped define modern JavaScript says that, definitely it resonates. The issue is not code quality. It is the declining importance of syntax as a human skill. Assembly yielded to high-level languages. Manual memory management yielded to compilers. Boilerplates yielded to frameworks. Each transition moved humans further from implementation and closer to intent. Large language models represent the next abstraction. Microsoft is not suggesting developers become irrelevant. No, that's not what they're saying. It is actually positioning them as orchestrators. The era of humans writing code is ending. The era of humans directing intelligence is on the threshold. The central question has changed. It is no longer whether AI can write code. It is whether execution systems can be trusted not to fail. Applications that execute reliably will persist. Applications that only respond, well, will not. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Front Page by AIM Network. Like, share, subscribe, and always remember, think AI, think AIM.
Fastest growing major economy in the world, an AI player, but clearly in the second grouping, fastest growing major economy in the world, an AI player, but clearly in the second grouping,
At the World Economic Forum in Davos, a familiar hierarchy surfaced. The managing director of the IMF described India as a second-tier AI power, end quote. Davos, well, the IMF chief looks at India and uses a label that has followed the country for decades: second tier. It was meant as a classification, but you know what? It landed as a challenge. Ashwini Vaishnaw did not respond with sentiment or reassurance. He articulated with structure. India, he said, is working across 5 layers of artificial intelligence: applications, models, chips, infrastructure, energy. The point was not to win an argument. It was to calmly describe a system which we believe carries a lot more weight. To support that view, Vaishnaw pointed to external evidence. According to the Stanford AI Index, India ranks amongst the top 3 globally in AI penetration and preparedness, and second in available AI talent. So while one global institution placed India in a lower tier, independent data placed it near the front. The contrast framed the rest of the conversation. But before we, of course, get into that, we'll have to say this to you. We focus on stories that carry consequences, not just attention. If this one matters to you, please, we request you, help it travel by hitting the hype button. At Davos, Vaishnaw also spoke about timing. He said up to $100 billion in AI-related investment could be announced at the India AI Impact Summit in New Delhi, scheduled for February 16th to the 20th. And of course, the countdown for that has already begun. According to the government, roughly $70 billion of that investment is already underway. Another $50 to $80 billion is under active discussion, putting an end to the early stage speculation dialogue and indicating capital, which is moving toward execution. And of course, the guest list reflects exactly that. Emmanuel Macron, Bill Gates, Google DeepMind's Demis Hassabis, and potentially NVIDIA's Jensen Huang. Global technology leaders have been consistent in private conversations with Indian officers and officials. India is increasingly where research is applied, tested, and scaled. The distinction is definitely noteworthy. Much of the global AI race has focused on building ever large models. India's focus has been on using intelligence across services, governance, and industry. That difference influences outcomes. A useful comparison lies in mobile payments. India did not invent digital payments, no. But once systems like UPI were deployed at national scale, adoption accelerated faster than anywhere else in the world, and we know this. The value was not in invention, it was in execution. The same pattern is now emerging in AI. Hardware tells a very similar story. Indian engineers are already involved in designing and optimizing complex chips used by companies like Google, Intel, and AMD, particularly for efficiency and edge deployment. This, of course, brings us to the conversation which is back to the structure. India's approach spans 5 layers: applications, where scale already exists; sovereign models, including Sarvam AI and Bharat Gen, with multiple mid-sized systems under development; semiconductors, with Micron's first commercial production in India expected to begin in February; and of course, infrastructure, which is backed by tens of billions of dollars in live investment; and the final one, energy, where nuclear reform and smaller reactor designs are being evaluated to support future compute needs. This approach does not depend on owning the largest possible models, no. Vaishnaw has argued that geopolitical influence in AI will not be decided by parameter counts alone. Large models are expensive, energy intensive, and exposed to global supply constraints. Execution capacity compounds locally. Stanford's index places India third globally in AI vibrancy. If the investment figures discussed at Davos are announced in New Delhi next month, the classification debate may lose relevance altogether. And here, as always, is the front page take. This moment is about redefining how leadership is measured instead of wasting time on proving someone wrong. If AI power is defined by who trains the biggest model, the race looks one way. But if it is defined by who deploys intelligence across population scale systems, it looks very, very different, my friends. India's bet is on the second definition. As Peter Drucker once put it, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Yes, what Davos may be beginning to recognize is that AI's center of gravity is tilting from invention to execution. And in that shift, India is no longer waiting to be classified. It's actually building its own category. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Front Page by AIM Network. And as we always say, like, share, subscribe, And always remember, think AI, think India, think AIM.
If you look at the impact of pollution on the Indian economy, it is far more consequential than any impact of any tariffs that have been put on India so far. If you look at the annual cost to India's GDP of the level of pollution that you have, and it's not just the effect on economic activity, but it's also the loss in lives. I mean, the numbers are really large. Based on a World Bank study that was done, I think it was published in 22, about 1.7 million lives are lost every year in India because of pollution. That's 18% of the deaths in India.
India walked in expecting a standing ovation post a victory lap, emphasizing fastest growing economy, digital superpower, the global bright spot. But the tone shifted, and very quickly. We had Ashwini Vaishnaw, the government's architect, with the swagger, and on the other side, Gita Gopinath, the IMF's realist with the receipts. And I think we all saw Vaishnav's confidence give way to attention. When she hit India where it hurts the most, not the economy, but something far more critical, the air we breathe. She voiced a line that silenced the room. Pollution is a bigger threat to India than tariffs, end quote. I believe hitting a nerve. We obsess over trade wars. We obsess over oil prices. But what the IMF is saying is that the real enemy is omnipresent right outside our windows. She wasn't trying to be an environmental activist because the argument wasn't environmental. It was actually operational. So if you want global supply chains to shift to India, executives need to know one thing. Can my people actually live there? 1.7 million lives lost a year. 18% of all deaths? Wow. That's not a tragedy, that's a massive economic cost. It scares away capital faster than bad tax laws, trust me. But before, of course, we further explore the Davos incident, this is what I'd like to say to you. We, of course, wanted to request that you would please like, share, and subscribe, and hype that particular button, as it will help us spread the word regarding our reporting. Because we believe we track stories that carry consequences. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is one of them. Gopinath extended the argument beyond the air. On land acquisition, she described the process as more than complicated. On judicial delays, she identified a choke point that compounds over time. On labor reform, she observed that incremental changes are insufficient for economies seeking to absorb large-scale manufacturing shifts. Her point was structural. Livability, she argued, shapes growth long before policy announcements do. There is precedent for this. And here is what I have to share with you. It's scary. In Sofia, Bulgaria, one of Europe's most polluted capitals, a 2022 study found that over 60% of highly skilled workers factor air quality into where they choose to work. And nearly 2/3 said they would consider leaving the country altogether for cleaner air. And of course, capital investment, when it listens to something like that, it kind of shies away from long-term commitments. The same logic, she suggested, applies at scale. One statistic emphasized her concern. Since the 1980s, only about 30% of India's growth has come from labor expansion. Yeah. The economy has grown. Employment creation has lagged. Yeah. And her conclusion is this: becoming one of the world's largest economies is largely based on arithmetic. Ensuring broad prosperity is not. Vaishnav's response, of course, was not to contest the diagnosis. No. It reframed the timeline. When asked whether India could become a top 3 global economy, he adjusted the premise. The question, he said, is not if, but when. His confidence rested on 4 pillars. Infrastructure investment is already underway. Financial inclusion with over 540 million bank accounts opened. manufacturing expansion, and policy simplification. He pointed to sustained real growth of 6 to 8% over the next several years, to poverty reduction at historic scale, and to political stability as a magnet for long-term capital. He also turned the discussion on risk outward. Many advanced economies, he noted, are carrying debt. Yes, we know who he is talking about. Burdens that constrain future choices. India, by contrast, is entering its growth phase with relative fiscal room. And of course, now, as always, for the front page take. So where does that leave us? The narrative war ended in a very fascinating truce. On AI, Vaishnaw sees a sovereign stack: chips, models, energy. He sees India owning the tech. Gopinath sees the risk: AI devouring our call centers and coding jobs. But the conclusion is unanimous. India is going to be a giant. Yes, that part is established. The top 3 spot is definitely waiting for us. But the terms and conditions have changed. The IMF's message: India has growth, it has digital stack. The next phase is execution. Cleaner air, faster codes, relevant skills at scale. If those pieces fall into place, India does not simply become a large economy. No, it becomes a durable one, which is far more important. Capital is already positioning for the upside. But alongside market indices, investors are tracking a very different set of parameters: air quality, livability, institutional efficiency. Because in the next phase of global competition, prosperity will be measured by more than output alone. This, ladies and gentlemen, has been front page by the AIM network. Think AI, think India, and you know what? Think AIM. Good evening. Welcome to Front Page. Look, we've been talking a lot about government victories at Davos, the World Economic Forum, yes, the most exclusive club on earth. So we at Front Page are doing this, and we would request you to do it with us. What we're doing is that we are manifesting that for the next Davos, we'll be reporting everything live with the raw insights and behind the scenes from the biggest economic theater on earth. Now that we've had a moment of silence, back to the news. Karnataka was picking up the speed in terms of signing MOUs and getting funding, and then enters Karnataka's Deputy CM D.K. Shivakumar. He gets on stage, he pitches Namma Bengaluru. He calls it the city of the future. Standard politician talk, right? But then he drops the line that cuts through the noise. Beautiful weather is what he says. The crowd starts to laugh, the internet memes are out. But of course, here is the narrative war you missed while you were looking at the memes. A few days later, after the applause had faded, the paperwork was signed in Bengaluru. 20 crore rupees was approved for a new center of excellence. Its name is CATS, C-A-T-S, the Center for Applied AI for Tech Solutions. The location, HSR layout, at the Kionics facility, right inside the corridor where startups scale, stall, and well then scale again. This is significant because it is operational geography, and global companies have noticed this. Microsoft is expanding engineering teams right here. Google is scaling cloud, research and development. Meta is active. So are OpenAI and Anthropic. And now, of course, Mistral AI, one of Europe's most serious AI players, is in discussions to set up operations right here. And yes, they are not here for the weather. They are here actually because this is where products move from code to deployment. The funding structure explains the intent. 20 crore rupees over 4 years, split deliberately. 40% from the central government through METI, 40% from the Karnataka government, and 20% from industry partners. This matters. Why? Because when industry contributes capital, it expects delivery. Accountability follows naturally. And timelines tend to sharpen when progress can no longer be deferred to the next presentation slide. Now, here is the catch. Have you ever noticed that we are the ones who always find and take the catch and let you know about it? And as always, it's a very sharp, smart one. Here it is. CATS is not trying to build the next GPT-5. Karnataka knows it's not going to win the trillion parameter model war against Sam Altman. So you know what? They aren't even fighting it. They are pivoting to the ground game. Applied AI, robotics, supply chain optimization. Industry 4.0. To bridge the gap between a cool GitHub repo and a signed enterprise contract. For the startups watching this is what we have to say. You get testing environments, access to buyers, and IP support. For the MSMEs, you get automation that doesn't bankrupt you actually. You get margins, which exemplifies the missing middle of India's ecosystem. India never had a gap when it came to ideas or talent. No, we've got an abundance of those. It was actually the path from prototype to production. CATS shortens that very distance. Unlike most announcements, this one comes with a scorecard. Clear metrics, startups supported, prototypes deployed, intellectual property filed. Progress is intended to be measured. Stepping back, when we see this, the contrast becomes a lot clearer. The Davos speech set the narrative. The line about the weather drew attention for sure. What followed was substance though. Karnataka is placing a deliberate bet while larger powers compete to build ever more capable models. Bengaluru is positioning itself as the place where those models are put to work. This is a wager on execution, the application layer if you will, and on, of course, outcomes over ambition. From here, what will matter is not who speaks most convincingly, but who delivers consistently. Davos provided the sound bite. Bengaluru is writing the code. We'll, of course, be watching who builds, who ships, and who simply does the talking. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Front Page by AIM Network. Think AI, think Karnataka, and definitely think AIM.